Hey guys, I'm starting a series over the next few weeks as I get time to video, dealing with anxiety. What is it, and what you can do to kind of help when you might be having anxiety. So today I want to talk about what is anxiety. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there because some people will treat it as, well, you just need to get over it. You need to stop worrying. And they don't understand that there's a big difference between a worry and an actual anxiety disorder that will affect things. Um, an actual anxiety disorder is not just worrying about money before the next payday. It's not just, is my child sick and are they going to be okay? Um, Coming from someone who has battled it for years, an anxiety disorder will be um, sometimes extreme thoughts, like you're driving down the road and you see play out in your head your car like go through a horrendous crash while you're in it, or someone will break into your house and shoot everyone up. Um, so it goes beyond normal everyday worries that people might have to deal with and goes into extreme levels of anxiety. Anxiety disorders can range from generalized anxiety disorder, which are just persistent invasive thoughts like those I mentioned, that come into your everyday. Um, they're thoughts that instead of just saying, well, I hope the money's going to be there, and then you go on with your day, it is this invasive over and over. Um, Not just, will there be enough money, but will the bank take our house? Will the bank take our car? Will people start calling? And it's just over and over. It's just this relentless bombardment. There's panic disorder, and that's where your body actually kicks into overdrive. It kicks into fight or flight reflex without there being an actual physical issue. In normal situations, if a bear runs out of a forest, your body goes into fight or flight and it goes through certain biological changes to give you the energy and the instincts to survive. In panic disorder, your body goes into that same reflex when there are no dangers, and it goes through the same thing, but because there's no danger to run from or fight against, it just wreaks havoc on your body. There's social anxiety disorder, and that's where you have anxiety in social situations. But all of these fall under the general anxiety disorder umbrella. Um, and like I said, they're not these worries. We can't just snap out of it. We can't just stop. We know in the teeny portion of our brain that is actually our conscious mind, that's still logical. We know that the thoughts we're having are not real dangers. They're not really something to worry about. We know when our body's having a panic attack that there is no foreseeable danger, and so there's no reason for our body to be doing this. But we don't realize that while as the conscious part of our brain is about this big, the subconscious and unconscious part of our brain is about this big. And what it does, the little teeny conscious part does not have any control over. So the best way I've ever described panic attacks is like you get shoved in a corner and your body just freaks out and you have absolutely no control over it, which just makes it worse because you know the majority of people around you are expecting you to gain control of your body and act normal, and you can't do it. But there are things before you get to that full-blown stage that you can do. There's things you can do to help with the thoughts. It really boils down to a couple of hormones that get released, at least during panic attacks, called adrenaline and cortisol. And it can cause everything from racing heart or actual chest pain. It can cause numbness in your hands, your face, your feet, It can cause shortness of breath. I've actually come close to passing out, and that's because you get an extreme fatigue because your body is meant to only have a burst of that to protect you and not have it sustained. And you're really tired towards the end of it. I think the hardest part about any of these is the fact that most people don't take it seriously. They think, oh, you just, you cope with it. Maybe you should, count your blessings, or maybe you should just smile more. There are things you can do in between that help. But in the midst of it, that's the worst thing you can do, because it just piles guilt on the person that they can't function like this other person is saying they should be able to function. So, really, if you have anxiety, it is something that goes beyond simple worries. It goes beyond, there's something different, because it seems like no matter how hard you try, it's this creepy goblin that follows you around everywhere and whispers in your ear and messes with you. So don't take it lightly, even if people around you are. I can say that a huge portion of help comes from a really good counselor, not someone that's going to shrug it off or not take you seriously, but if you can find a good counselor that can talk you through it and teach you some different techniques that help you frame your anxieties. What one of my counselors used to call the what ifs, like how you can cope with that. Medication helps too. I mean, some of this does pertain to an imbalance in our bodies that we don't have control over. I can tell you mine is connected to my hormones. When I am pregnant, usually I don't have really severe anxiety, and in the middle of my cycle I don't usually have anxiety, but when it gets close to the end of my cycle, then I've always noticed there's an increase in panic attacks, there's an increase in those thoughts, there's an increase in all of that. And my primary care told me that a lot of times anxiety in women is related to hormones and the rise and fall of our hormones through our cycle. And that's not something we have a whole lot of control over. So I think that's one of the key things with anxiety, is realizing that unlike worries that you can push aside and you can go about your day, and there are things you can do that change your perspective on your circumstances, an anxiety disorder doesn't work that way. There's a lot of it that is outside of our control, that we can't go into our brains and tell our brains, okay, hormones, you can't drop below this level so that I don't have anxiety, or adrenals, you can't pump out adrenaline and cortisol for no reason and wreck me. And I think that I know that some basic things like getting enough sleep, if I don't get enough sleep, of course I can't function in a more rational, logical level, so then I have to compensate for that. I know some people, it's caffeine. Of course, for me, I have to balance that between enough caffeine to kind of offset my ADHD and not too much caffeine so that it ramps everything in my body into overdrive. So for the next few weeks, I hope to give you some very simple, easy to implement little strategies that you can do, because when you start, especially with panic disorder or when the invasive thoughts start, there are a few things you can do that can help curb it. One thing they've discovered is, yes, while our brain does something and releases, chemicals and fires off neurons, and that affects our body, they've also discovered that if you can change certain things going on in your body, like your breathing, that it will actually change what chemicals are produced in your brain. It's a two-way street. It's not just the brain does stuff and the body reacts, but that if you can focus on changing certain things like how tense you are or your breathing, then your brain will respond to that as a change in circumstances and will start releasing other chemicals or other hormones or firing different neurons, different parts of the brain. So stay tuned, and we will talk about next week. I want to talk about a simple breathing exercise you can do that I have found when I first start feeling that anxiety will actually calm it down, and it's like it redirects it until I don't feel it anymore. And it really does help me stop it from reaching that peak, reaching that extreme peak of terror. And even my husband has used it before and found it to be very helpful. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next week.